Yeah, what up guys, it's Yeti here. In today's video, I want to give a lot of generic advice for healers in World of Warcraft. I've been creating healer content for quite a while. I've been streaming, I've been uploading like my VODs and stuff, especially like UI-centered stuff, how to get better, how to prepare better, you know, how to get used to the stress and all of these things. And in today's video, I want to kind of cover the more generic and some also in-depth stuff you might not know about in World of Warcraft when it comes to healing, how to get better, how to improve better, you know, how to optimize your UI. It's a very generic healer video for Season 2 of The War Within, but let's get into it, guys. So the first thing I want to cover is raid frames. So as you know, every single healer in World of Warcraft is going to need raid frames to heal their party and their raid, right? I, for example, am using Grid 2. This is how my Grid 2 works in a 20-man environment. You can also use just normal default healing frames or raid frames from World of Warcraft. You can also use something like Cell, which is very optimized for a new player in the War Within. If you're just starting healing, it's going to be very good for you. And why am I saying this? Is because I think people are often completely like mistaking the fact that as a healer, your UI needs to be super catered specifically to healing. You know, as long as you have your raid frames semi-close to the center, right? They can either be on the left side or they can be down under. You can heal. It's good enough. You need to track the debuffs and your healing over times. Probably even more important to actually track your healing over times. So that's why I personally like Grid, because, you know, for example, I can show, you know, timers and all of these things however I want, you know, defensives and things like that as well. But default frames support this as well. You can also just get an add-on called Raid Frame Settings, which adds a bunch of features into your UI with basically no preparation needed. Like, for example, one of the best restoration druids, I'm a Resto Druid main, that I know from the class Discord, somebody who consistently gets rank 1s, is actually playing with default Blizzard raid frames. So there's no excuse really. You don't need a perfect UI setup to heal. It is good enough. You get raid frames on the left side, you start healing, you start pumping, you know, track the externals and things of that sort. Now, another thing that people are often, you know, confusing is, and I used to play with this as well, is like dark frames versus class colored frames, right? Should you just have the frames in one color, like green or something dark, and then have the name in the class color? That works, but I personally actually moved back to full color of frames because it's a lot easier to find vulnerable targets in a raid, right? So let's say you're always dropping a hot onto a hunter first because they're the squishiest, or, you know, a boomkin. You know, that's why I personally went back to class colors. All right, so one of the most important things that a player needs is timers. Everybody has timers, but people are very often using them wrong. So default timers are going to look something like this. So when when a certain ability is queued or is coming up, it's going to show a timer and it's going to be counting down, right? So, you know, from 20 or 40 or whatever, and rage timers are sometimes up to 7 minutes if you're playing WoW Classic. They're going to count down and they will appear, you know, on your screen and they will, you know, pop. This is a very like useless piece of information because you're probably not really going to be staring at these timers. You're going to be looking at the game more so. And there are so many ways to make these timers a lot friendlier for a healer. So here we're going to talk about raid, but this works for Mythic Plus as well. We're going to go into Liberation of Undermine, and we're going to go into a boss that we know does like huge, you know, raid-wide damage. Right now we're doing Sprockenmonger, and we know that for him, when he is dropping the bombs, that is the most annoying part. So they're called foot blasters right here, mines. And, you know, let's say we want mines to be a lot easier to see. We could either make it have a countdown. So when we enable this, before the mines will, you know, be casted by the boss, it's going to actually count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I, as a Resto Druid, when I hear 5, 4, 3, 2, I know that mines are going to start dropping, which means there will be 4 consecutive hits after that of a lot of damage. And I can ramp up and place hots on everyone and just start, you know, spam healing during that time. And I top people off almost instantly. Another thing you can do if you're a more visual player is you can make the bars a different color. So again, if we go into a test bar right here, I'm using normal bars and, you know, emphasized, which are red bars as well. But, you know, this doesn't really matter. So we go back to Undermine, we're going to go back to Sprockenmonger, and we're going to go back to Foot Blasters. So I can change the color, let's say to yellow, I'm going to do that. Actually, I'm going to make it yellow. So 255, 255 like this. By the way, the reason I can type color in like this is because I'm using an add-on called Better Color Picker, or it's called actually Color Picker Plus, sorry. LVI has this built in already. So yeah, we're going to do bars, and we're also going to do emphasized yellow. So no matter, you know, if the bar is on the bottom or the top bar, it's going to be yellow. It's going to be a lot easier to spot it this way. Again, you could also add a countdown, or you could modify the sound. You could get a different sound if you wanted. These are the ways, you know, you can make these things a lot easier to spot. And again, Mythic Plus, it's the exact same thing. Yeah, so for example, you know, a good boss is going to be the last boss in Theater of Pain. You know, you could set up a timer for Grasping Rift, because, you know, that's a super dangerous ability that you have to be super careful about. So again, you can color code it. You can add a countdown if you want. You can add a different sound. That way you're always going to, you know when things are happening. Another way to make healing a million times easier, and you probably know this already, is going to be getting a weak aura called the War Within Dungeons. So it's wago.io/TWW Dungeons. And this pack right here is going to actually include auras and countdowns and all kinds of stuff for every single dungeon that is currently in the rotation. Make sure to update this aura every couple of times, you know, per season, because things do come out regularly, or like fixes or, you know, timer changes. And this in here has literally everything built in, right? Of course, you also need to get anchors so that things are in, you know, the same spot every single time. But generally speaking, this is like an insanely good weak aura for every single M+ player. For raid players, you of course have the Liquid pack as well, which does the same thing. So Liquid's Liberation of Undermine right now is probably the one you want. Of course, you need the timers and other stuff with it as well, but this is not a weak aura tutorial. This is just, you know, me giving you information on how to make healing easier for you. Now, another holy grail type of situation for healers is something called Mouseover macros. So the best way for me to explain this to you is to actually open up my macro menu and go over one macro, and you will probably understand everything that you need to know. So first of all, let's cover it. There are a lot of add-ons that enable this. Yeah, so you can enable an option inside Blizzard's UI that makes every single spell mouse over. But I don't like this because it's not fully functional. It's not functional the same way that macros are. You know, again, also an add-on like Click will work on frames, but I don't know if it works when you hover, you know, stuff in the open world. And I also don't think it works when you target nobody, you cast on yourself, because that's like the default way of WoW targeting that I've used forever, and probably a lot of you guys have, especially if you have played a DPS in the past. And I want to explain to you what I'm talking about. So I'll go into my macro, and we're going to just look at Riptide. It's the most simple one. So the macro says hashtag show tooltip, which shows the image. Then it's /cast at Mouseover exists. Then it's an empty bracket and then Riptide. So this spell, this macro is going to cast, if there's a Mouseover, it's going to cast on the Mouseover. If there's no Mouseover, it's going to be an empty bracket, which means default cast. So that means if you have a target, it's on the target. If you have an enemy target, it's yourself. If you have no target, it's yourself, right? So this is my Riptide macro right here. We target this person, we press it, it heals them, right? Perfect, no issues. If we have no target, it heals myself. And if I select, you know, let's find a Horde player. This is a Markar Orc. I press 3, it casts on myself, right? It's very straightforward, very simple, very typical to World of Warcraft. And of course, it works on like all unit frames, right? So, you know, for example, this you know, human right here, I can cover this. Let's say I'm targeting this dwarf, but I cover this human. You know, I still cast it on the human, and it works exactly same on, you know, raid frames as well. And it requires no add-on. This is built into World of Warcraft. This is probably the most optimized macro. You know, the way you can write it with as little characters as possible. So, again, I can leave this in the description. It's no biggie. You know, get this for everything. And of course, for casts like totems, you need to do, you know, /cast at cursor, so that, you know, when you are, you know, you just put your cursor here and you know, drop the surging totem like that. A keybind and then mouse 1 to confirm it, right? So these are the two like most important ways I would recommend you to cast spells. Again, you can probably use Click as well, or, you know, even Cell has a built-in Click casting. thing is that when you have an add-on like that, right, you can, let's say I'm using 1 for Lightning Bolt, 2 for Flame Shock. I could use 1 when I'm hovering a friendly then for Riptide, and 2 for Healing Surge, right? So I would be using 2 keys for 2 different functions depending on who I'm targeting. But I just much prefer having 1 keybind per ability. It just feels a lot smoother for me and like, you know, old school, and I'm used to this way, right? So it's not objectively better, but I would definitely recommend that to everyone. And lastly, of course, I want to show you how to use statistics that are publicly available to make healing for yourself easier, right? So in World of Warcraft, when I said earlier that you're using class colored frames, or you can even use class names, it doesn't really matter. It's important to know who you should prioritize, who you should be healing the most. So what I always do is I check the death stat. So you do top 25% of players. This is, by the way, on Warcraft logs. You just go into raids, you go into statistics, and you go into deaths, right? So you can do mythic, top 25% of players. This is fine. And what we see right here is the amount of players that are, you know, causing or dying in pulls, right? So Augmentation Evoker right now is dying the most. After that, it's BM Hunter, Balanced Druid, Dev Evoker. So generally speaking, I actually said that I don't heal mages enough, but you know, this is probably a good improvement right here. It seems like ranged players in general are dying a lot more this tier than melee players. So I should be targeting mages a lot more as well with my heals. But yeah, BM Hunter and Balanced Druid I knew is going to be the targets I'll be healing the most. And after that is Dev Evokers. So, you know, generally speaking, these are going to be classes that have the least defensives, that are getting the most unlucky, that are also, you know, probably have, you know, the lowest HP pools usually, and defensive are just not working for the tier. They're also ranged players, so maybe this tier is a little bit harder for ranged. I'm not exactly sure about the stats for that one, but this is how I pick the targets which I'm healing. Now, another way is when I already mentioned you earlier that you can use timers, right? Of course, timers are something you set up for the fight, but maybe you will not know what to set up, like which ability is the most dangerous one, right? So what we do is we go into logs, and I picked a random, very good healing Resto Druid, because this is what I often check. And this is for Mythic Sticks. And I went to damage taken. And we want to see that, you know, this boss fight like ramps up a lot, up and down, up and down, up and down. And, you know, it hits the absolute like damage peak here, roughly like at 4 minutes, right? So these are the targets that are taking damage. And of course, then you have to check what is doing the damage, right? So melee damage is kind of useless. So for a lot of these people, these are tanks, right? So it's melee meltdown, melee toxic fumes. Tanks have a different situation, like a weird situation going on here, because BDK is pretty much going to have the boss on him the whole time. So melee is going to be crazy for him. But then we check like the DPS, right? So incineration, toxic fumes, incineration, right? So we see the toxic fumes is probably doing the most damage, right? So we can go even further, and we actually just do toxic fumes, right? Like this. And we see that, oh, this stuff starts ramping up right here. You know, how can we time our cooldowns around this? So we have, you know, we cover this as much as possible. Up until a minute 30, it does nothing, right? So that's why this tier, a lot of healers are doing a lot of damage early on in the fights, because, you know, this actually happens in more than one fight. So this is another way of you to learn how to actually play this. Now, another resource that a lot of healers actually dislike is called Lorgs, lorgs.io, which actually shows the graph of individual casts of the top rankings. So we are back on sticks. You know, I mentioned this earlier, and we have Resto Druid selected. So right now we are tracking Convoke, and I think almost nobody plays this, so it doesn't matter. We can track Tranquility as well, and I mean Flourish is always going to be used after Convoke pretty much, so we don't really need to track this, right? So we see that the way it's starting, right, is people are convoking roughly at 13 seconds, and then some of them are tranking at 40, some of them are holding trank until 1 minute 40, like this. And they're pretty much convoking on CDs. So at 15 seconds or 13 seconds, at 1 minute 19, so almost on cooldown. And then 2:26, almost on cooldown. 3:38, almost on cooldown. See, it's like a lot of them are doing similar types of healing. This, of course, has to be coordinated with your other healers, right? But depending on what kind of comp you have, you can suggest some of these timers for your guild, right? If you are, you should check out your own assignments, because you're probably doing healing assignments if you're mythic rating. And if your assignments are like way off compared to the top logs, there's a big chance your cooldowns are misaligned, right? Like, for example, you're tranking at a time when you have to move. That's why no top log does it, because it's not optimal. You should probably ask them to move that cooldown. And I want to show you that you can actually do something similar for Mythic Plus as well. So this right here is a log from Operation Mechagon level 17 plus 17. You can also log Mythic Plus, which is going to be very, very useful for you. And you can check the damage taken and healing done of players. So for example, this is Ortimist. He is a very known Mistweaver monk. And you can see how his chart went up in this, up and down like this. Also damage taken, right? Like what was doing damage, during specific timers. It takes a little bit more information, I guess, to understand it better. But again, Machinist's Garden, we know that this boss is crazy hard, right? So if we go during this time period right here, we go into casts. Let's say what did Ortimist cast during this time, right? Like, I don't know. There's just ways to use logs for more than just, looking at if you did good damage or not, right? And I'm trying to, show you that you can do something like that. It's also very nice to compare casts per minute, right? For example, Tiger Paw, like these are spells that he's been using in this dungeon. You can compare this to your own. Again, this is just for Machinist, right? You should probably just do for everything, right? Because obviously sometimes you BL on some pull and then it's not going to be exactly the same. But, as long as you're being critical about this information, you can get a lot of feedback when it comes to individual fights and playing your own class, right? But yeah, make sure to compare things to your own class, because, a Resto Druid and a Mistweaver Monk will have very different breakdowns and usages of their cooldowns. So yeah, that's it for now, guys. Thanks for watching this video. I'll try to make more like this, maybe more structured in the next episode as well. So yeah, I'll see you guys around, and peace out.